All right, I'd like to welcome everybody to general government meeting. It looks like we only have a few council members today, but we're not taking any action items, so we'll go ahead and proceed with our meeting today. And we will start with Adam and the CMAQ.
Hi there, everybody.
Hi, Adam.
What's going on?
Here.
All right, so just a little background on CMAQ and what that means. CMAQ is an acronym for Congestion Mitigation and Air Quality Program. It's a federal grant program to help minimize air pollution, specifically and how it's related to transportation. So the city of Canyon City got in a little trouble back in the 90s for what's called PM10, which is dust particles of a certain size that they attributed to some of our gravel roads in the area. And because of that non-attainment, we were eligible for a grant program that we have been taking advantage of ever since. And in that, we have been paving a good amount of our gravel roads with that money to mitigate that dust. And so in the memo, I have listed out some of those roads that we have paved in the program through the years. One of the main reasons we're coming to you at this time is because the program for PM10, unless you're in a non-attainment area in Colorado, is ending because they're shifting the money to the other higher concentrated pollutants that are more common in the highly urbanized areas such as Denver and Colorado Springs for the other pollutants. And so since we are in attainment and have been in attainment ever since our first project, that money is running out for us this next fiscal year. So the way the funding has worked is the rural communities that were in those non-attainment areas automatically got $1 million off the top to split evenly, and that equaled about $200,000 for each year. And so we had that funding, that guaranteed funding for every year, and then if it wasn't used, it was accumulated and rolled forward to next year, because sometimes the project we designed didn't use all the money, or it took a couple of years to get a project put together that actually exceeded the amount of 1 year. So it is a grant program that requires a match, a little over 17% local match for the grant program. And so the process that was used in the beginning so we paved Riverside Drive first, and because that was the area that was identified for non-attainment. And after that, the city policy was, and how they were deciding where to use those funds was where the neighborhood was willing to invest themselves in the form of a public improvement district. And so mid-90s to there for a good decade or so, there was a fair amount of neighborhoods that were interested in improving their neighborhoods on their dime. And because typically that's how roads get paved. They either get paved by the original developer or they get paved through public improvement districts where the adjacent property owners pay for that benefit, not the general public paying for that. And so while this was a different form of money, that was the idea was, well, we'll put the money in the same locations. And so recognizing that things like curb and gutter are important for drainage and the integrity of the pavement, if there was an improvement district that was formed by the neighborhood to pay for curb and gutter, then we would use the grant dollars for the pavement. And we did that on almost exclusively all the projects. And then we started running out of neighborhoods that were interested in participating in PIDs. We tried a couple of them in some of the neighborhoods for the streets that we have listed in the database there, and they just weren't interested. And so then we started going to the next roads on the list that had the highest traffic counts. Obviously, the roads with the highest traffic counts create the most dust, and so that was good justification to the state to continue spending money on those streets that generated the most traffic. That being said, then recently we have, as you're well aware, the 2A program, we've bumped up into another issue, and that is lack of funding for the other items that have to be addressed on a street before it's paved that is not covered by the funding of the grant. And that includes drainage and water line replacement. And also, more recently, we have been working with and coordinating with other utilities. We do that all the time, but more recently, we were given a 5-year capital plan by Atmos Energy in places and locations that they have to replace gas lines in town that are steel lines that are either failing or anticipated to fail soon. So they've put together a 5-year capital plan that's supposed to start next year, where they'll be systematically going through and replacing gas lines. So the next criteria that we look at then is obviously whether there are other improvements that need to be made, on those streets that have the potential for paving, which is the reason why some of the streets that actually have higher traffic counts than some of that we've paved haven't been paved because we didn't have the funding to take care of the other issues at the time. So typically in the past, staff was tasked with choosing those streets based on that criteria and policy. And then I know recently there's been some interest in getting some of the roads paved that necessarily were not at the top of the list for the reasons stated. And so today what we're here to discuss is we brought you the data. Basically shows the chart that you were given, gives you the name of the street, the extent of the street, the traffic counts that are most recent on them, and then some of the criteria that we're looking at is whether they have a ditch crossing. And when we talk about ditch crossing, we're talking about one of the significant main ditch crossings that would could require a culvert replacement, a box culvert, and then whether it has stormwater or groundwater issues. Again, those aren't addressed by the grant dollars. And then whether there's Atmos work that's planned in the future, near future, and then whether it has a water line that needs replaced or installed, and then whether that street has a high number of complaints or also high maintenance. So that's the criteria that we looked at. And then on the final page of my memo, it lists basically the 3 streets that we fleshed out that are possible with not impacting the other funds as discussed on the ones that we're recommending that meet the criteria that we just discussed. And out of those 3, staff, I visited with the street superintendent. We reviewed the data, and it's our opinion that we ought to just use the money to finish the balance of what is 4 Mile Lane that's unpaved. The reasons for that, above and beyond the criteria that we discussed, are that that's the street we've been working on the last 2 years. This would finish that street entirely, so it wouldn't be a problem in the future. It's probably the simplest one on the list to get environmental clearance and other clearances required, because the plan is to immediately after this meeting next week start survey and design for the project, because it takes about 6 months to get clearance through CDOT so that we can do this next summer, which would be the constraints of the grant. So all those things said, that's our recommendation, and we are open to feedback or questions.
Are there any questions from council?
I was wondering about a water line. We have water lines that are 100 years old. What's the age of the water line in a street? Like, let's talk Gussie. I travel that a lot too.
I don't have that data in front of me. We did collect some of that data on age, and that's where, again, I don't have that in front of me. Bob is here, he may be able to speak to some of it. But we did collect that data as far as if we had the information on how old the line was. And so it was discussed on whether, how old the line was, the material it was, and the size. And that was, the determination was used to make, or the information was used to make the determination whether the water line needed replaced or not. So we're not just replacing to replace.
You're not replacing the replace?
Right. We've decided it either needs replaced because it's undersized,
Okay.
or it's old and falling apart, has a high amount of leaks, or it's a material of a material that we know from an age that it's probably likely to have issues. So an example is the asbestos cement pipe that we know has beam breaks often.
Well, I would like to see more streets done in town before 4 Mile Lane. I just think that's more appropriate. There's really nothing out there to me, I know that you want to use the funds and everything, and it's cheaper and all the other stuff, but I think it's just not appropriate. And maybe not all the funds need to go there. You're doing it because it's the easiest one to do, and I'm not crazy about that idea. I mean, $500,000 for a lane that has, what, 4 houses on it? And
Well,
just because it's easy.
Yeah,
that's all
I'll
you're doing
clarify.
it.
We're not doing, easy is one of the criteria for one of the reasons it's chosen. It's not the only reason. It also has one of the highest traffic counts of any of the streets on the list. So again, this is about dust generation. So just clarify,
Well-
it is easier than some of the ones on the list, but part of that has a lot to do with why and whether there's other additional work that needs to be done.
Well, I respectfully disagree. I think that we should do streets in town, what we classically call in Canyon City.
Sure.
And if the pipe isn't 100 years old, let's just pave it. Okay? That's my opinion.
Go ahead.
When was it last surveyed,
What?
the traffic count?
We did some recently this summer, and the others might be 2 years old. So they would only be higher than what they are today. But they would not, none of the streets that we identified, has there been any additional traffic generators. So we're comfortable with the numbers where they're at.
Okay. I guess I'd feel more comfortable if I had that report in front of me,
Which report?
showing the traffic study.
We have that. That's on
Counts
this,
are on this
on this sheet here.
sheet.
Oh, it's
Yeah,
because
on
I
that-
can't see it.
On that spreadsheet, so the fifth column is the traffic counts. So just to give you an idea, they're all under 100 trips a day except for Blake, Bridge, 4 Mile Lane, Fraser, Grape Street, Kuntz, and Vine. Kuntz, Vine, and Fraser are pretty much all one road system. They just jog around the same course but have a different name based on their direction. So those are your streets that have more than 100, and Vine and 4 Mile are the ones, and Kuntz have more than 200 trips a day. 200 was our minimum. When we started the program, 200 was our minimum count before we decided to spend the money on any of those streets.
Adam, I know that a former council member, Weed, really wanted us to do Vine.
Yes.
And I'm curious, what is entailed in that $602,000 water cost for Vine? And is it really necessary?
The water cost is necessary. The other issue with Vine Street is there is no drainage and the right-of-way is very narrow. So there's not any type of funding currently that between all 3 funding sources, that we'd be able to do those streets. Unless, to the mayor's point, if you want to go out and just pave what's there and drop a asphalt mat on top of the existing grade and let things be as they are, which is not prudent and good idea in my opinion, you could do that.
And you said that the CMAQ money, it's running out, so are we,
It's done. This is the last project
this
we'll
is the
do.
very last project we're going to, and what is the plan for the foreseeable future? Will we just quit paving?
I imagine we'll be
gravel
back
streets?
to, unless we have some additional program that we create with additional funding, it'll be back to the way it was, it's either by developer or improvement district.
And have any of these streets that have been suggested, have neighbors been contacted and asked if they'd be interested in matching funds for BID?
Yes.
And they
And-
all, on each of these streets qualify for their agreement to enter BID?
So PIDs that have been attempted before but that failed to collect enough signature on a petition were in the Blake and Brewster area, in that area. Bridge and 8th Street, there was an attempted improvement district in the past. Ussie and Prescott in that area. So those are areas, again, to the mayor's point, that's where the density is whereas people have, there's a higher density of residential frontage in those areas, which is why then, you would have someone that typically would come to you and say, hey, I want my street paved, how do I get this done? And you explain the petition process to them and go through that, and they typically go out and feel the neighbors out first and see where they're at, Because if they're not anywhere close to 50%, it's not worth the effort to circulate the petition.
How much does it typically cost each resident?
Well, if they're just participating in, as we've done in the past with curb and gutter, they're just going to pay the frontage foot for their, for curb and gutter in front of their house. Right now, on construction that we're doing right now, we're paying around $40 a foot for curb and gutter. If they then, we've also had improvement districts before the CMAQ program where they would help pay for the pavement too. That, of course, then just has the price, go up beyond there.
On this list, which streets have been done in the last 4 years?
In the last 4 years? On the completed list?
Yeah.
Last 4 years. The last two projects we did were 4 Mile Lane. We did 4 Mile Lane in 2 segments. And then before that, we did Cherry, Phelps, and South all in one project. And then we did Gradine Industrial, South 11th, South 10th all in one project. So the last 4 years, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, those last 8 bullets.
Okay. We have.
And
go
I
ahead.
have a couple of questions. So Adam, excuse me, on the water cost, those are, if we were going to be paving those streets under 2A money, that's money that we would have to find elsewhere in the budget to do. I mean, we wouldn't do it unless we did those water costs. Is that correct?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
So it's kind of to the mayor's point. In other words, we have funds available for paving, but there's other additional costs that may come into play, like
Correct.
water costs for
Correct.
water infrastructure.
Right.
So the water costs that we see on your spreadsheet, those are all, if we were going to do any of these streets under a 2A project,
Yes.
we would have to budget for that water cost.
Right, which is the reason why we don't have any funds for the CMAQ program, because we're using all our water capital dollars right now to chase the 2A money.
Right.
Yep.
Understand. So I understand the mayor's point, and I tend to agree with that. But in this case, the last year of a program, and there's only 3 streets where we're not going to have to get additional city dollars. This will be for 2020, is that correct?
Correct.
2020, so we would have a chance to budget for that if we wanted to. But to your point, we are chasing 2A with budgetary money for water projects.
Right.
So I'm good with this proposal myself. I do have a question about the public improvement districts.
Mm-hmm.
So in essence, when we do that, when the city does that, the city is actually loaning the residents money that then they pay back through a special assessment.
Correct.
Over the years.
Correct.
Correct. So it's really a cash loan to a resident. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
It's a
so-
10-year special assessment. They pay for the full cost of their portion of the project. It's at a very high interest rate because the city doesn't intend to be the bank. And so most people will refinance or pay it off or pay it down.
Gotcha.
Yep.
Understand. And so my question is, for the residents that have not done that, and this might be something we have to ask council about, and it could be special improvement districts rules that are different. But generally, if you're a lender and you're loaning individuals, private citizens, money, you have to give them a yearly statement showing what the interest that paid was, what the principal is, et cetera. And so that's my question. I don't expect an answer here, but I think that we should ask that question and see if we are following, if there are rules that are applicable there about financial disclosure that the city should be following.
Yeah, we could talk more with the finance director and attorneys, but yeah, the way it gets, the term that they use, it gets certified to the county treasurer, and then it shows up on the tax bill as a special assessment. So however that gets disclosed to them on an annual basis, I don't know.
So, yes, so really, but the point is, if the city's lending the money,
Yeah.
however we recover it or recoup it, if we're lending the money, there may be financial rules that come into play. And so I just ask that we take that under consideration and see if we can.
Yeah, another
Straighten
thing,
that out.
another thing to note, John, also is in the past, we've used the Cemetery Perpetual Fund to back that up. And there were times even where we had so many PIDs going on that we ran out of lending capacity because of that.
Right.
So that, that's tracked, and then they have to track how that's drawn down each year and how people make their payments and so forth. So that's something we'll have to discuss too.
I'm sure we keep good track of it on our side. My question is on the kind of the consumer side. I don't know that the consumer rules apply.
Yeah.
But that's the question.
Okay, we have 3 residents that have requested to speak, so let's give them an opportunity. And we'll start with Dave Williams, please.
Hi, my name is Dave Williams. I live at 813 Bridge. First of all, I would like to thank Ryan personally. He's been very cordial to me and personally invited me here. He made personal phone calls. I appreciate that very much. It was an eye-opener for me to come here. It was very interesting to see what he said and how the funds are allotted. We understand that money is short. We also understand that we've been fighting for 15 years to get this paved. We also understand that last year or 2 years ago, they were going to run the water line that is in question, which did not get done. They did run some sewer from the houses to the main in order to run the main, but they haven't done that yet. After talking to Mr. Stevens Ryan here, we did see some action on the road. They did come and they did grade it, and they put gravel down, and then a week later they did put down the mag. However, they missed a strip that is 8 feet wide in one end and 2 feet wide at the other. When the truck driver was asked if he would just make one more run, he said, no, we're only allotted so many gallons. That I understand, but that's not how it works. When you're building a house and you run out of material, you don't stop building the house. And for another X amount of dollars, well, first of all, the center of the road was a river. He could have slid over and caught that rest of that. We'll leave that as it lies for the moment. Next, we have many big trucks running across our road, believe it or not. The viaduct is down there for the train, so they can't go under that. So they come up 8th Street, which is dirt, come across Bridge Street, which is dirt. They were going up to a property that we did talk to the city manager about, and found out it was county property. So I went to the county, they stopped those big trucks. Now they are parking down on city property at the end of 8th Street. They said that the city gave them permission. I don't understand how, and maybe this is the wrong time to bring this up, but you can lead me the right direction if I'm wrong, but how can the county say, no, the trucks can't be there because it's an LDR, a low-density residential area, but 500 feet over is city property, and the city lets these trucks park there? Those are the trucks that are running across our road and tearing it up. I have pictures right on my phone of holes that were over 4 inches deep, 32 inches across. We understand money's short, and maybe you can't get to Bridge Street, but it's one block that's not paved. We don't care about curb and gutter. If you would blacktop it, that would be fine. If you can't blacktop it, please maintain the road. We always have to call and fight to have a grader over there and mag put down. And the answer we get time after time after time is we don't have the money. So our road goes unpaved. And that's, just wanted to bring that to your attention. Something needs to be done with our dirt road, whether it's blacktop, paved. Also, one other thing too, I have 8 seconds here. As far as the residents on one side of 8th Street, there's 5 houses. Most of us would probably be willing to share cost if necessary. On the other side of the street, it's owned by one person, the entire block, who says no. There's your 50%. We cannot fight those people that do not want to sign it. In our opinion, it should be of no cost to us anyway. We've been fighting it for so long. 15 years ago, it was one price. Now it's probably double the price. Thank you for allowing me to speak.
Thank you, Dave. Next, we'll have Eldon Martin. And please let us know your address as well, Eldon.
My name is Eldon Martin. I reside at 825 Bridge Street, Canyon City, Colorado. Pretty much what Dave Williams said covers what we are fighting for our streets. But I only have to disagree with him in one area. He said 15 years. It's been 25 years for us. We've been there since 1994, and since 1994, I have contacted different city officials and talked to them about paving that street, whether it's just pavement alone or whether it's just curb and gutter with it. Never were we ever contacted about sharing the cost, to pave the roads. I have never had a conversation with anybody along that line. We are on that road. There's, like they said, there's trucks going up and down that road, and it belongs to a company called Mission Ready Tree Service. Constantly up and down that road, going up to the properties and then come down parking on the city. And he pretty much discovered that or discussed that with you, so I'm not going to go over that again. But if you would go walking almost into our house, we have thick dust that comes into our house, and when we constantly have to clean it, but it's dust just coming in. We have clouds of dust sometimes as the trucks goes down the roads. And then we also have from the Touch of Love florist, we have from Brady's Garden Center people coming down the road. We have many people that come down the road that avoid Myrtle Street because of the stop sign there when they're taking their kids to school at Lincoln Elementary School. We have many, and I don't know when the last traffic count was, but I haven't seen a traffic counter out there for quite some time, so I cannot tell you what it was. I don't think it was this year. It may have been last year, but I don't even think of that. But I cannot prove that. I don't have that data in front of me. But the only thing that we're asking is in that road is that it's been for 25 years since we've been there, and I know it's been there well before that when I had knowledge of people clear back in the 70s that road was dust or dirt. So we're just asking if we could just have the road just paved, even if we don't get the curb and gutter, something to stop this dust that's coming down on us from day after day after day after day. And I think, I would hope you would agree that maybe it's about time we get that one block paved, because the one on the 800 block above us is paved, and then it's paved down there in the 700 block of Bridge Street. One short block. I know I'm running out of time, and I want to thank you for your time to listen to my complaint.
Thank you. And next, we'll have Lisa Martin.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. There we go. My name is Lisa Martin, and I live at 825 Bridge Street. The gentleman who just previously spoke is my husband. He is correct. We moved to Bridge Street in May of 1994. And at that time, we were a lot younger at that time. I guess the dust didn't really bother us. But as we get older, health issues are starting to occur, and we're noticing, it's just more difficult to live in that environment. We have noticed on the ballot here for Canyon City and Fremont County increased taxes, and that unfortunately has been on a regular basis for road improvements. And almost every time we have seen that on the ballot, we go, yeah, maybe this will be the year. Maybe something will happen. Well, it's been 25 years and nothing has happened. And the two gentlemen before me that were speaking, they spoke about the details of Bridge and the situation there. One thing that was brought up is that there's only one block of Bridge that is not paved. And it's kind of difficult to understand why the city does not pave that when we are tax-paying citizens here in this county and in this city. And it almost feels like you're just not recognized. And I just want to express my opinion as a resident who's been there for 25 years and has been a tax-paying citizen in this city and county. And we would just like, please take into consideration Bridge Street. Thank you.
Are there any questions from council?
Perhaps for Adam again. Adam, I remember in the 2A project that we calculated that we have like 99 centerlane miles of currently paved streets that were in our system altogether, if I remember correctly. Does that number sound right?
You're right, yeah.
Yeah. Do you remember the number of center lane miles of unpaved streets that we have?
We're
in the
around
city?
11 miles.
11 miles.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question, Adam, about Bridge Street. It says that the pavement cost would be about $80,000, but the water cost would be $102,000. And just for the record, your traffic count, the last traffic count was 129 for Bridge Street.
Right.
It doesn't say the year, but that's just
Yeah,
the
I don't
number.
have that data on there.
Yeah.
I'll also, to note also, they are right that the sewer line was renewed on Bridge and 8th Street in anticipation of paving Bridge and 8th Street. Bridge and 8th Street was the next CMAQ project on the list until we bumped into 2A and the water money got spent. That's what happened. They were next on the list. That is correct. And so, really the decision has to be made as far as, can we find the money to do the water, or do we ignore the water line and just build the road? That's,
Bob,
if you're
maybe?
interested in doing that site.
Can you address that?
And actually, while Bob's coming up, Adam, can you, I see Atmos Energy, this is one of the streets that's on their list. Do you have an idea of when they're planning on doing that street?
No. So Bridge, was 8th Street on that list too? Let me look real quick. Yeah, part of 8th Street is too. We could find out and see what that looks like. The good news on that is it maybe wouldn't be a fire drill for them like 4th Street was this year. It's possible that they might be able to get that planned for next year, if that is the direction we take. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Good afternoon, council, staff. Well before 2A come along, we had adopted the philosophy of where we were reconstructing streets to renew infrastructure underneath that roadway. I've been on the receiving end of many phone calls from our citizens not happy with us when a new street has been laid down and then we're right in there digging it up because of a water leak. Nothing gives you a black eye more than that, and very choice comments from citizens in that regard. I think it's not prudent to go down and go put either a concrete pavement street in or new asphalt down on top of an old water main. It's not a matter of if it's going to leak, it's when it's going to leak. And Adam's right. I know we had talked about Bridge and 8th Street, and then 2A came along. And I can remember talking to council about the fact that this was before 2A was approved, that we need to be mindful of this, because if it passes, the water fund is going to have trouble keeping up with it. And we see that even this year. Adam has chosen some streets that, for example, Forge Road. I've got a section up there that I'd love to replace, but we spent all of our capital money this year on Main Street and South 4th Street. I anticipate later this year, Finance Director and City Administrator and myself and others will be talking to you folks about this issue in particular and how impacts water rates. But as a matter of good management practices, to go down and put brand-new oil or concrete on top of old water mains is just asking for a leak. I mean, that kind of activity on the surface, the vibration, the constant work you see on top of it, it's going to go leaking eventually. And so that's my opinion, that as much as it may, pain everybody, it's just not prudent to overlay old infrastructure like that. Seen it too many times already.
Bob, do you know about how old the water lines are on Bridge?
I could check with staff. I believe it's some cast iron water main over there. So I imagine it's every bit of 50 years old, which typical cast iron, 50 to 60 years is, it's been engineered for its service life, depending upon the environment that it's in.
And I think we probably need to make the clarification about 2A money, is that according to the ballot language on it, that 2A money for streets can only be used for reconstruction of streets. And none of that money can be used to replace water lines or pay for staffing or new equipment or anything else. And that's why the water budget is being stretched thin, because they're having to keep up and pay for all the new water lines for these new streets.
Correct.
So did you give a little precursor that you're going to be asking for a water rate increase next year?
Well, the discussion needs to be had. I mean, ultimately, it's council's decision, but we need to have that discussion. So, I mean, I've got many other areas of the system that are higher priority to the water department than chasing the 2A streets, but the dollars are limited.
Okay. Tony, do you have any comments about the upkeep of Bridge Street?
Good afternoon. For the people that don't know me, I'm Tony. I'm the street superintendent. We have it on a regular grading cycle. Our cycle is usually about every 2 months, unless I field a lot of complaints from residents about it needing it more often. It has been mag chlorided for the last 2, possibly 3 years, I think. I'll have to check into the strip that the gentleman was saying was missed. That I haven't heard about until just now, so I will look into that further to see what happened. It should have been able to been hit why they was there without an issue. I don't know why it wasn't, but I will follow up on that.
I'll be glad to show you some pictures I have with me right now.
Okay, that's fine.
I appreciate that, Tony, and I know that when you say you're going to take a look at it and take care of it, it gets done.
Yes, I do.
So Tony does a very good job in that realm. John?
So maybe to wrap this up, I would suggest that as part of our budgeting process, we look at what we can do for this particular street, including the water money, what that may look like. Have it in there as a switch, we can turn it on or off, depending on what the full council decides. We're not going to make any decisions today, but I would just ask that during the budget process, we look at, this was next up, and our 2A process has kind of short-circuited what we've been doing. So I just ask that we look at this in a budgetary sense to see what the implications are for the water department, including and how that may affect our 2A spending.
And Ryan, I have another question, or maybe it's for Bob. If there was a rate increase for 2020 in the water, would that make funds available to do Bridge Street?
I think we'd have to look at that and see what would actually be generated. And obviously, it's going to depend on what the increase is as well.
Right. So I think we just need to include that question in that study. Do you have a very quick comment for us?
Yes, I do.
I'll need you to come to the mic, please, because this is on television.
The quick question is this: I don't believe that the road has been done every 2 months, graded every 2 months, and if in fact that has been true, then I can show you a picture on my phone right now of 5 giant holes caused by those trucks. Then something needs to be done to either get the trucks off the road or maintain the road more often. Thank you.
Thank you.
What do the trucks do? What trucks are you talking about? Is there a project when it's done, they're no longer going to be there? What do you?
Mission Ready Tree Service has been parking their trucks for 2 years at an address on Bridge Street on the hill, which turned out to be county. County went out there, I filed a complaint. They went out there maybe 3 weeks or a month ago, told them they cannot work out of there because it is an LDR. So the man whose property they were keeping it on, his mother owns the property down below. So now they are parking it at the end of 8th Street on his mother's property, which he says the city gave him permission to park. I don't believe even, I don't know for positive, but I don't even think Mission Ready is based out of Canyon City. But they park 3 very big trucks there with a grinding machine, and they have loud mufflers, and those guys like to bang gears. They are breaking a speed limit every time they go down our road. And much, much, much dust until they put the mag down. So I believe that they're illegally. And that would be my next step after this, to find out if they can technically park down there.
Ryan, is that something you can assist
Yeah,
these
we'll
residents
look into
with,
that.
please?
Yep.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so we do need to wrap this up. We are going to do some little bit more investigation and studying crunching numbers, but do you need more sense from the council of their preferences as you're going forward?
Yeah, sooner than later, we need some direction. So if that's not today, we need it soon, just because we need to get started on the design process so we can get clearance done in time to build it next year.
Want to wait for the numbers?
And for other council members. We're a little low
We'll
today.
put together a couple estimates and bring that back.
Okay, and I guess, I do want to take a closer look at it. It does seem an injustice if Bridge was on the #1 list and now all of a sudden it's cut out because of the shortage of water funds. I'd like to see what can happen with that.
Sure. Okay. Thanks.
Thank
All
you.
right, thank you all.
Thanks, Adam.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to go ahead and move forward with our police chief, Derek Harvey, and our procedural justice initiative based on an independent assessment of the police department.
Hey, those are mine.
Thank you, Madam Mayor Pro Tem. So the memo that I submitted to Interim Administrator Ryan Stevens was in response to the climate assessment that was done in April of this year. It's a continuation of things I've done since I've been there. Just as an example, and it's not listed in the memo here, the vision, mission, and values of the police department prior to my tenure were drafted by the chief of police with no involvement or input from line level staff or from really line level supervisors either. Last year in May, we started the revision of that process to where the vision, mission, and values of the department were drafted by everybody within the department, and before they were finalized, there was input from civilians as well as line level staff. That permeates how I've tried to look at the department and things that I'm trying to do. And so the climate assessment is kind of the next step of that piece to have that outside opinion about things that we can continue to improve in. And quite honestly, communication, regardless of where you work or whether it's the Pentagon or a mom and pop shop on Main Street, communication is always going to be an issue. And so those are one of the areas that I think are extremely valuable to get an external opinion about ways that we can, the interests of line level staff and others throughout the department that there's not enough information flowing about. And so one of the systems that I implemented when I got here was a monthly leadership meeting, which is all first line supervisors as well as command staff, where we talk about issues, and one of the standing agenda items has always been personnel as well as rumors. There's operational issues and some other things that are listed on those agendas, but as an example, the climate assessment that we got on May 5th, on May 8th, I brought this executive climate summary to the leadership meeting. Now, one of the things that we've done with this as a result of the climate assessment is try to expand who's able to come to those meetings. Honestly, it was more of a formalized mechanism to be able to disseminate information and get feedback, with the idea that line level supervisors and command staff would then go to their subordinate personnel or team members and find out, hey, this is what was discussed at leadership. These are what we're kind of moving forward with as far as programmatic responses, and then what's the feedback or concerns, to try and formalize routes of communication. What we found through the climate assessment is that not everybody was getting the same message. And so one of the examples that's listed in the memo there is to try and widen that swath, so to speak, of how we are disseminating information. And in light of this, what we have done is, I hate using email, but unfortunately, to get a consistent message across the organization, that's definitely one of the ways to do that. And so every time we have a new person start, we introduce that person via email to the entire organization at the police department. And that's just one example. Some of the other things that are listed in there, instead of trying to address each individual one, what I really wanted to do with this process, and procedural justice is based on 4 pillars. And I'm sure everybody knows in 2015 that St. Louis, Missouri, and Ferguson is more widely known, but Ferguson, Missouri kind of started some of this process. Procedural justice has been around for a while, but essentially it's being involved, having a voice in the process, and being open and transparent in your decisions. Now, we've done that. If you ask my opinion, we've done that as transparent and open as we can be with some of our processes. There's always room for improvement, and so this climate assessment is one of the ways to get a different viewpoint from outside of the organization on how we can continue that. And so what I read in the climate assessment, procedural justice was a perfect fit for this. And so a voice in the process, I think, was one of the things I heard pretty loudly in this. That's not new. Quite honestly, the command staff, when I first got here, was not involved in something as simple as the budgeting process and didn't know on a daily basis what their budget was. We have aligned the budget to where each commander is individually responsible for forecasting future needs, for overseeing spending within their individual categories and line items, so that they have a greater hand in the process and greater involvement with how we are spending that budget, with forecasting future needs, and making sure that we get the equipment we need. A good example of that is chemical munitions. Chemical munitions are generally good for about 5 years. So after that, they need to be replaced or they don't work well. Well, our chemical munitions for barricaded subjects were 10 years expired, which means that they were at least 15 years old, with no real forecasted plan on how to replace those items. Radios are another good example of those. So trying to, without formalizing it, well, in essence, I did formalize it because we realigned the budget. We placed some different authority and priorities in different places within the organization. Those things were already in process prior to the climate assessment. The climate assessment, I think, gives us a clear pathway forward to formalize those processes, whether I'm chief or anybody else is chief, that moving forward, those changes that I've implemented thus far within the police department continue, and we continue to meet the needs of those who are serving in the staff capacity at the police department, as well as meeting the needs of our partner organizations within the city, the demands of council, and obviously the demands of our those that we serve within the city. So the 2 big things that I'll highlight and then kind of turn it over to you for questions or specific comments is the Policy Review Committee and a Strategic Planning Committee. Those are 2 central themes within any organization. We write down our procedures and how we do them, and then what's our future forecast for what are we going to accomplish this year, within the next 5 years, and having involvement in that without going through a promotion process is the closest thing that you can come to having a real voice within an organization's future. So the policy review committee would be made up of folks within inside the department, and quite honestly, I think there should be some folks outside the department as well. Now, how that is chosen and who that person or those people are, I think are discussions that we still need to have. But one of the other lessons from Ferguson is that if we only internally look at our procedures as a police department without outside influence or intervention from, say, the business community or advocacy groups, then we are missing an important part of our procedures. Prior to this climate assessment, we started the mental health co-responder program that you're all familiar with. Part of the structure of how I built that process was with a group called the Wellness Intervention Committee. And the Wellness Intervention Committee is made up of stakeholders who have a part in the process or who are impacted or influenced by this co-responder program. The National Alliance for Mental Illness is one example of a stakeholder we've asked to be part of that group to help us devise policy for how that moves forward. And essentially, that same mechanism that we drafted a year ago for the co-responder program, we are doing internally. And so what spoke loudest to me is we are doing a lot of things external in the organization. We need to also make sure that we have parity inside the organization, and that's what this memo does.
Any questions from council? Dolly?
I just want to say that everything that you've put into this memo has been, it shows that you're willing to hold yourself and your department accountable for any actions that are done within your department. So I want to commend you for putting this together. It was very thorough and kind of hits all of the concerns that were brought up.
Thank you.
Yes,
John?
Sure. Thanks, and I second that, Dolly. Chief, I just have a couple of questions to help me understand a little bit better, and maybe a couple of suggestions. And some of my comments, perhaps I'll sit down with you offline and talk about. But does the policy review committee exist now?
It does not.
It does not.
No,
Okay.
sir.
So how many people do you expect that the committee might be made up of?
That will voluntarily be on it? Because policy is very exciting. You know, the vision is really to make sure it's not a number of people. I actually was part of something like this before at a previous organization, which is where the thought came from. And we had around 8 people.
Around
And
8.
it was less important the number as opposed to how many different functions in the department. Because just like with, you know, the detectives and patrol, if we change a patrol procedure but detectives aren't aware of that, it changes how they do business or things that they can't do prior to. So it's more about representation throughout the department. So my thought would be is probably around 6 folks inside the department and then potentially 1 or 2 from external to the organization.
And I'm not asking for a commitment on a number. I'm just trying to understand what size committee. So a range is pretty good. It mentions in here the PRC chair, and will that be automatically designated to the commander, or will that be an elected position by the committee? How do you see that working?
So currently, and the reason why it was designed to the chair, or the chair was designed to a commander, is because how the policy system currently works. We have a system called Lexipol that council approved for us to use for police department policies. As I'm sure you're all aware, police departments have very different demands and legal requirements that are placed on them by Supreme Courts, legislatures, as well as regulatory bodies that oversee law enforcement. So this group, Lexipol, has attorneys on staff as well as subject matter experts that devise policy and then push it out to organizations. Currently, the commander that was listed as the policy review chair is responsible for looking over those updates as they come out, and generally it's legislative updates or case law updates that come out. Lexipol codifies those in a policy, not a procedure, and that's an important distinction. Codifies them in a policy and pushes those policies out to the organizations that say, yeah, that's something that fits within our organization and that's something that works for us. with our size and budget and so on and so forth. So that individual's in charge of that currently. That could change, quite honestly, because the process flow after this, because of charter and some other things, once the policy review committee gets it and makes a decision, it would have to flow through the chain of command anyway up to me for questions, approval, review, that type of thing. And then potentially, depending upon the city attorney's perspective on that, the city attorney and city administrator, or ultimately council. We have well over 1,000 policies at the police department. And so just for the sake of process and being able to make changes in a timely manner, I'm going to recommend that we cut that process as low as possible. Generally, an attorney should review it when you have subject matter experts that say, hey, this is the best way to do it, but it may not be compliant with case law or legislative acts. And so the city attorney absolutely needs to be part of that, and I think they've agreed to review those policies.
Thank you. And that helps me understand a little bit, because I was going to ask who the subject matter experts were, but now I understand that they're maintained off-site essentially. Is that correct? And that there would be no in-house subject matter experts?
No, that's not accurate. So
Okay.
there would be some external, but there are also some internal. We have some really good folks at the police department. John Sabatino is a good example. John Sabatino has been in law enforcement in this county for a very long time. He was with the sheriff's office. He's with us now as a sergeant. Loves traffic. He also is he's our lead firearms instructor. And so if we had a policy that came down that said, we're going to use Glock 21s or Glock 17s, whatever the case may be, here's how you need to maintain it, here's the process to get them reviewed, he would be considered a subject matter expert to go to and say, he's received the training, he's been doing it for a number of years, and he has influence in the department for how that process runs. He may be considered a subject matter expert. Conversely, the co-responder program is another good example of that. We don't have any mental health clinicians inside the police department. And so that review would be for like a behavioral health organization's certified addictions counselor or someone else who has that expertise to say, this is current practice, best practice within this profession, this is how it would influence law enforcement. That subject matter expert review would then come to the policy review committee to say, well, this is how it affects patrol, this is how it affects detectives, this is how it affects civilian record staff, this is how it would affect municipal court. All those pieces need to be there so that when we put out a policy, it doesn't create more problems than it solves.
Thank you for that. That's very enlightening. You talk about a hiring selection / selection panel members from all levels of the organization, and you talk about them in terms of being a board, I think. And how many board members? Just a range. I mean, how many board members you think about having?
3, and actually we've already implemented that. So we did have a commander and 2 sergeants. We now have a commander, I'm sorry, not a commander, a sergeant, a line level police officer, and a civilian. And we try and make that racially and gender diverse for a number of different reasons, quite honestly. But currently it's a diverse group. No one person is the same race. We have both male and female representation, both in sworn and non-sworn capacities on that board. And so that's already occurred.
Thank you. You talk about formation of a strategic planning committee also. And will the strategic planning, and within that, and also in that same area that I'm on page about 3 or 4, I guess, under the voice and representation in the process bullet, talk about a public safety business plan being developed. And the public safety committee, the annual business plan, the question I'm trying to ask, I think, is one a subset of the other? Is the public safety committee a subset of the annual business plan committee? If I understood that right?
No, they would be one and the same.
One and the same, okay.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. That helps. Okay. And I would just point out that at the bottom of that page, you mentioned the SMART method, and the acronym left me in the blank there. I was not sure what that meant. Just kind of an editorial comment. And then just two further comments. Under the transparency and openness of process and impartiality and unbiased decision-making, I would just note that you don't have an implementation date there. I'm fine with that, but I think that something like that probably should be in this document, at least as a goal, a realistic goal that your department could meet.
So the SMART method, and I apologize for using an acronym without spelling it out, but it's specific, measurable, achievable, responsive, and time-bound.
Gotcha.
And part of the reason why there was no date put on that was at the point that this was created, House Bill 1119 had not yet been signed. It has been now. Actually, I take that back. It was signed April 12th. I just didn't know that. So that was one of the things I was waiting on, was that House Bill 1119 talks about what we can and can't release with internal affairs investigations.
Right.
Prior to it was pretty much nothing gets released, but
Right.
now with legislative reform, that may open some doors for what we can and can't share.
Gotcha.
And we can share a lot more now than we could.
Right. Understand. Thank you.
All right, I have a couple of questions too. It's on that same page, under transparency and openness process, under internal notification of imposed discipline. The very last sentence under that bullet says that Commander Wagner will be assigned the, and then there's a cliffhanger.
Good catch. I apologize for that typo. She would be assigned the responsibility to determine that process and get a group together. Because one of the issues with this is that I want to curb rumors about discipline that occurs within the organization, but I also don't want to vilify people who have made mistakes. And so what I think is really important with this process is not just what the law says we can do, but what people internal to the organization are comfortable with. And one of the things I expressed at the Chiefs Association about this particular bill is concern for officers who say, hey, yeah, I saw this and I didn't think it was right, and come forward. We want to encourage that. We want people to feel that there's a comfortable area. We, meaning the police profession and myself internally in the organization, want people to feel that if they see something that is wrong, that they have the ability to come forward and say, I think this was wrong. And have some protections there that we're not going to put them out in the public to say, so-and-so said this. So that's one of the pieces there, and I apologize for that cliffhanger, but that's one of the pieces there that would be another committee to determine, okay, what would people feel comfortable with? What really starts rumors about so-and-so got disciplined for this or for that, or shouldn't have been for this? How do we bridge that gap? And I think the only way we do that effectively is the same way we do with our policy review and strategic planning. So she would be responsible for getting a group together, cross-sectional of the organization, sworn, civilian, different levels, to say what should we release and how. So that's what it should have said. I apologize.
And can you give me a further example of the impartiality and unbiased decision-making? When you talk about the project management and implementation of the new programs that will be assigned to members within the department who have not yet participated in significant project development.
So it's kind of a double-edged sword, to be honest, because the folks who are busy will raise their hand again to get involved in other projects. And so part of that is trying to delegate more effectively across the organization so that if someone hasn't had a chance to manage a project yet, that they may, whether they volunteer or assign that project, have the opportunity to at least lead a project. And I'll give you a good example. And this was not quite 2 years ago, but definitely was over a year and a half ago. The color of our uniforms and the type of uniforms that we are wearing was developed by a committee when I first got here. And part of that committee, originally it started with a commander who was leading that committee, and then subsequently it was actually, the leadership was transferred to a sergeant. Now this is a year and a half ago. So this is kind of a continuation and more formalizing this process to say, who has an interest in uniforms? Who has an interest in the type of bulletproof vest we wear? Make a recommendation, lead a project, do the research. We did the exact same thing a year and a half ago with our shift schedule between 8s, 10s, and 12s and days of the week. We had a committee for that as well that also made recommendations. And then there's one other one. But anyway, so that's more or less kind of what I'm talking about there as an example, is as these projects come up, people who are involved or want to take part in that process will be allowed to do that, and some may be assigned because of areas that they are working in or not. One of the projects I've recently taken back over is the electronic citation system. So we've had that approved by council since last year, and when we got the grant from the CDOT 405C traffic, it's STRIAC, I can't remember exactly what it stands for, but it's the traffic records group of CDOT. I've expanded that group already to have information technology, records, who were previously, IT was part of it as a part of the implementation process. Records had been consulted but wasn't actually part of that process. The courts and the city prosecutor, in addition to 4 officers inside the organization who are testing the project, will also be considered subject matter experts. So what I'm envisioning with this project management is, and I'm using the electronic citation as well as several of the other technology projects we have right now, is to put out a bulleted list of how we are going to select a chair, how we're going to manage those projects, develop timelines, determine who stakeholders should be involved or may have an interest in being involved in that particular project, and then having it in an organized manner so we have a time frame of when is it going to occur, when are we going to at least tentatively try and roll it out, who all is going to be involved, so that there is greater communication throughout the department. And I'm sorry, I might have went down a rabbit hole, but did that answer your question?
No, yeah, I appreciate that. And I do have an additional question. In the climate assessment, it also had a suggestion of improvement in having better advanced notification of meetings, training programs, employee changes, and new programs. Does this plan cover that, or is that something that needs to be added to improvements in the future?
That was a deficiency that, quite honestly, I had asked for at the beginning of this year. Last year, our training programs and our calendars were done ad hoc. It had always been done this way, quite honestly. And last year, I had asked for the commander responsible for training to develop a year-long calendar. That happened last year, but the training didn't occur last year as per the calendar. This year, we did the same thing, and some of the dates were moving. That affects me too, because my schedule is very tight. So it's not addressed in this particular plan, but it is being addressed. And it's being addressed with, when we send out a date or notification of training, it doesn't change because of site or instructors or something else. That all needs to be worked out ahead of time. So that's an internal thing that we should have been doing all along, but it's not specifically addressed in this plan.
Okay. Well, thank you. And I want to add my recognition as well and appreciation for the detail of this and addressing the needs and the areas for improvement, and also for holding a high standard at the police department. That's something that I think we all can stand behind. Thank you. Any other comments? Sorry, Ryan
Just
Stevens.
going back to your last comment about training and scheduling, Chief, can you correct me if I'm wrong, but the new software as well, the SmartForce software, is going to play a role in some of that as well. Is that correct?
Absolutely. And not only that, but also upcoming events. And so, again, another project I have taken back an active role in making sure it gets completed. And I was actually working on it before I came here. The patrol calendar, and it affects a bunch of different things. How many officers we have on the street, who gets approved for leave, what holidays are coming up, what special events are coming up, what training is coming up. All those things will be codified on a calendar that everyone within the department can access from their MDT in the car, from their house, because it's a web-based application, and then also put in requests of training, look at DORs. So the SmartForce program is kind of email on steroids, if you will, because it's kind of a data warehouse of where we capture all of that information. But the simple answer is yes, and I'm hopeful that we'll have that rolled out by August 1st.
Okay, and I actually do have another question. Another big area of concern in the morale for our officers was lack of staffing, and a big item on that was not having competitive wages. You mentioned you're going to address that at a future moment, but can you kind of give us some more information on that? Because I know we have increased wages. I'd like to hear a little bit more about the situation.
So, and I'll give you an example of an officer that is a sergeant now, but at the time before he got promoted, he had been with us for about 4 years, right around 4 years. And even though he was with us for 4 years, another agency who was not El Paso, Colorado Springs, or Pueblo was going to start him at right around $3,000 more base than we were paying him after 4 years of service. And so we were able to move him into a range that kept him here. He probably still would have made a little bit more money at that other agency, but that's a very common theme. And, you know, when we look at our history, people can say, you know, I'll start off at less wages to work in an area that I grew up in, but after 4 or 5 years, the money definitely makes a difference. And conversely, we had a sergeant who left us and went to another agency and wanted to come back, even though he was making roughly $30,000 more a year than he was here as a sergeant. And he's a deputy in that other location. So he wanted to come back. There was a number of things that happened, but salary was an important part of that. And he did not come back. And again, there's a myriad of reasons for that, but salary was an important part. And so kind of the overall concept with this is, even if we can't start them off at the El Paso counties, because I can give you 3 people within the last 6 months that went through our process. At the very end, somebody stole them from us because they offered more money, one being El Paso County. And there's no way we can touch that. It was $60,000 a year to start. We are right around $42,824 to start. There's no way that I could justify, because it would create compression across the organization and obviously would upset the balance of what everybody else is making. So there's but 3 people in that same circumstance, and 2 of them, one went federal, the other one went to a private organization. They can accept a lower wage if in the long term they know this is what I'll be making in future years. And we're a small enough department that chances of becoming a sergeant or a commander, those don't come open very often. So we've got to come up with a way that says in 5 years I'm going to be able to provide more for my family. Otherwise that job in Douglas County or El Paso or Colorado Springs or Pueblo looks really good because it starts off at $12,000, $15,000 more a year. So the plan essentially would be to work with finance to determine what we can afford and a time frame that we can afford, but it would be proficiency based. So to top out, in other words, whether that, however many years that ends up being that we can afford, to top out would be somebody as a line level officer is instructing, is a member of a national organization of some sort of professional society within law enforcement, like the International Homicide Investigators Association or the Colorado Crisis Intervention Teams Association of Colorado board member, those types of things to develop our folks internally and to make the organization overall better. So it pushes them to say, okay, I want to push myself in order to make more money. I've got to give back to the organization, not just be here. So that process I had developed and actually had been working on it with other city departments since March of 2017. So I plan to push that forward and codify that with our current next budget proposal, as long as we can afford it, as long as Tammy Nordyke says I can do it.
Yeah, we're so glad you're here, Tammy, with all this talk about needing money. We need you to get Harry's magic wand back. Yeah, Dolly.
Chief is saying right now. So a lot of what I'm hearing you saying is a lot of what the school district struggles with: retaining and keeping good quality teachers, lower wages, competitive wages in other school districts. Have you had conversations with possibly the HR director or even George Welsh to maybe collaborate and come up with a plan that both of your organizations can implement?
Yeah, and actually, I was fortunate enough that Superintendent Welsh asked me to be part of that focus group of community members for how to develop and keep teachers. And some of the same things that he talked about, we've been trying to implement here. So making it to where people can transfer inside the organization without having to get promotion, making sure that increased opportunities to specialize or do things that they're interested in are inside the organization, and really focusing on quality of life here in this valley. And it starts with hiring, who we're hiring and why. And one of the first questions I ask in my final interview is, tell me what led you to Canyon City Police Department. I don't ask them, why are you applying here? Why are we different? Tell me what led you here, because that usually will bring something up that, I've heard about your organization. I've got other folks that I know that, and we have. Here's an interesting switch. Now, we have lost people to Pueblo and Douglas and all those other places in the past. We are having people come from some of those organizations to come to us now. So that, again, salary is an important part, and there's definitely some of those folks, like one of the people I'm talking about with El Paso County, that young man grew up here, and he knew one of the officers that grew up here and is working with us now, who left and came back, that said, hey, it's a great place to work. We're doing great things. You should come be a part. And he went through the entire process and said, I've got a new baby. I just can't afford that pay cut. Otherwise, I would come. So it's not all about the pay. And I was party to some of those conversations. We are trying to do those things internally as an organization to increase. If you come to work happy and you love what you're doing and you're supported in what you're doing, and if you run into problems like bad radios or like today the radio system was down, that's our job as the command staff to fix those issues and really prevent them from occurring in the first place. And so I think as we continue kind of that philosophy, things will get better. We're holding at 32 right now. We have 4 in final backgrounds. We're authorized 39. And we actually had 2 people, and I won't say what agency in case somebody's watching, what agency locally in southern Colorado they were coming from, but 2 people that postponed because of personal matters, but intend to come back in the process in the near future. So hopefully that occurs, and then we get those folks that are coming here because they want to be part of something bigger. Hopefully we'll hang on to them. But again, what I've seen in my experience in the past is even if they want to be part of something, at some point that car needs to be replaced, or, the house needs repairs. And, that's not unique to the police department. That's in every department within the city. And I'm not saying or suggesting that we should get special treatment. What I am telling you is that if we want to be competitive in this job market in southern Colorado, we have got to do something to say, staying here, you're going to be rewarded, financially. And, the other kind of intrinsic things, we're going to continue to try and expand those. Council graciously has given us, cars where before we had cars that were 19 years old. That is a significant factor, quite honestly, for a lot of, especially the younger millennial group. So trying to understand the group that we're recruiting, trying to continue to expand those internal things, we're absolutely doing those. And the school district has been a great partner for us and allowed us to be part of those.
Good. Thank you.
Yeah, that's the Civic Canopy Committee that a lot of us have participated on, because the police department isn't the only one, the city's not the only one, the school's not the only one. We all have the same problems, and the Civic Canopy is really kind of addressing it citywide for recruitment and retention of good quality employees. Mayor, you were going to have a comment.
I completely forgot. No. Anyway, thank you. I believe, just a keen observer of things here for a long time, you had a big ship to turn. And I think you're doing that, and I appreciate that. The only other thing is that I see a lot of committees and everything. Is there a possibility that you could look at your chief here, and then these are committees So we could visualize from council how, I mean, you have here I don't even have Adam in mind here that laid that out, that said this would be, maybe that'd be helpful to your staff as well, to see some formal little blurbs underneath the chief. I mean, you're still the chief, you're in charge. And, but you have policy committees and other committees, and then maybe special committees. Just a more visual look at what they might see and how they could participate in it. But I do appreciate what you do. Keep doing what you're doing. And like I said, I think that was a big ship that needed to be turned, and I think you're doing it. Okay?
Thank you.
Excellent. And I would personally appreciate maybe an update at some point in the future that you think is a reasonable time frame to see how things are going and if the improvements that you're anticipating are coming into fruition, and see how things are for the climate assessment address. Any other final comments?
I was just going to agree with Mayor Pro Tem Smith. I think a lot of the deadlines are towards the end of this year, so maybe December or January we can do an update and show where things are.
If I could suggest maybe just January, because I'm sure that December is going to be
A lot of
consumed with the
canceled
budget.
meetings.
A lot of things at the end of the year.
Okay, Dolly?
Just one more question. Ryan, were you satisfied with this report?
Chief and I have been working very closely on this, and yes.
Okay.
Okay, and I just have two other items, Ryan, that are off topic. Can we please receive notification when the Constantinos is going to be demolished?
We can't do anything yet.
Oh, demos?
Yeah.
I believe, I'll double check. I think it's August 10th, the week of August 10th. But I'll get you the exact date.
Okay, and then I also wanted to pass along a compliment to the city staff. You were in attendance of this meeting with the city of Florence and Canyon City and the county commissioners, and the commissioners had met with Phil Lund at St. Scholastica, and I want to make sure that our city staff gets publicly recognized, and if at a staff meeting you can also recognize them, that there was high compliments given by Phil Lund and his people that the city has been very wonderful.
I made mention of that at the staff meeting on Tuesday.
Okay, and so I just want to pass those compliments along too. We're really happy to hear those reports.
Thank you.
Okay, this meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.